All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. I want to welcome everyone to the Civic Spark Poster Symposium series, celebrating the accomplishments of the 2020 to 21 Civic Spark Fellow Cohort. My name is Kaylee McCain. I'm a program manager with the Local Government Commission, working on the Civic Spark program. We are a national service AmeriCorps program of the Local Government Commission, and I'll be facilitating today's session, which is called Resilience in the Face of Water Woes. And we're going to be featuring some amazing projects that our fellows have been working on this year. You'll hear directly from them about the main aspects, takeaways, and next steps for their projects they've been working on for almost 11 months now. A few logistical details before we begin. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties today, you're welcome to direct message Atlee Keller. She's our co-host today, also a program manager at Local Government Commission, and has led these water fellows throughout the 11-month service term. So feel free to direct message her through the chat box, and she can help troubleshoot any issues that might be coming up today. Every fellow will have about 5 to 6 minutes to present. You'll see their posters up on your screen. And after each presentation, we will open it up to Q&A from the audience. So we would love to hear what questions you have about the fellows' projects and their time as Civic Spark Fellows. You can either put your questions in through the chat box, or you're also welcome to unmute yourself and you can ask your question directly as well. Finally, I'd also like to encourage audience participation. Feel free to put up those reaction emojis, give shout outs and congratulations through the chat box as we get through each presentation. These fellows have poured a lot of work into their service year, and we really want to make sure they feel special because they have done so much, and we really appreciate their service to California communities. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and move on to our poster presentations. So we're going to start the day by hearing from Marlis Jean, who's serving at the California Department of Water Resources. So I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Marlis.
Thank you, Kaylee. Hello, everyone. Hello to my family who's here. My name is Marlis, and I worked this year with the California Department of Water Resources, stationed in Sacramento on a drought resilience for self-supplied communities project, in which I helped to pilot water shortage contingency planning for two communities or two counties in California, Lake County and Tulare County. So the context behind my project was something that came out of the last drought we experienced in California, the 2012 to 2016 drought. You may remember it was really serious and it really impacted a lot of communities across the state. A lot of folks ran out of water, a lot of disparities and inequities were exposed in that drought. And so out of that, the state passed AB 1668, which essentially directed the Department of Water Resources to identify who the small suppliers and rural communities at highest risk of drought were, as well as develop a set of recommendations for improving drought planning for these communities. And so basically through this extensive stakeholder process, this group called the County Drought Advisory Group, they developed a couple suites of recommendations, and that is currently in the legislature as proposed Senate Bill 552. And my role as a fellow was to sort of pilot these recommendations on the local level and then bring back information, observations, challenges I've identified to the state for them to then use that as guidance for implementation in the future. And so this is my poster. You can see there's a map of California here. I worked in Lake County and Tulare County. So Lake is up in the top left and Tulare is in the Central Valley. Both of these counties were really impacted during the last drought. And they have their own sets of challenges associated with drought and water shortage events. And my project kind of took on a different role in each region. In Lake County, I developed a drought risk assessment, which is essentially a vulnerability assessment to be used in future planning documents. But the major task I took on in Lake County was pulling together a group of stakeholders with the help of my co-fellow Bethany, who's going to talk after me, and my supervisor at the Department of Water Resources. Together, we convened like a group of stakeholders to kind of communicate and coordinate on messaging and public outreach for water conservation, and try to develop a set of priorities for the region and what would be necessary moving forward if there are future droughts. And then in Tulare County, I also developed a drought risk assessment with the help of a web tool that was developed by my supervisor at DWR that takes into account a number of different factors to assign a risk score regarding drought. And so this document that I wrote will be incorporated into what's called a crosswalk document for their planning department, which crosswalks their local hazard mitigation plan and their general plan, their climate action plan. It's a really important step forward for Tulare County when it comes to water shortage contingency planning, which may be a requirement if SB 552 gets passed. And like I said, each place is very different, has their own set of challenges. I'm not going to summarize all of them, but it's very clear that the state needs to kind of clarify their role and how they can help these communities. It's a lot of staffing and money and time and resources to put a requirement on these communities and counties that are under-resourced and then expect them to follow through. So that's one thing I'm going to take back to the state as far as my recommendations go. But it was also revealed that a lot of folks would benefit from having like community-based organizations and environmental justice groups to help in these efforts. Overall, I think that my work really contributed to them planning for drought moving forward. We're obviously in a drought this summer, so hopefully they can take some of the capacity I was able to provide them and be more resilient moving forward. And that's it.
Awesome. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Marlis, for your service to the state and also the communities of Lake and Tulare. We're happy to open it up to any questions from our audience about this wonderful project. To get us started, Marlis, I'm curious if you can share maybe what was the most surprising thing you learned throughout working with both Lake and Tulare?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the whole thing was very eye-opening for me. I know from school that managing water resources is inherently difficult, especially in California, which has some very archaic water laws and water rights laws. But really my experience in especially Lake County was really eye-opening. A number of times in these meetings I was having with this drought task force, which we've had for the past like 12 weeks now on a weekly basis, there's something every time revealed that is just like yet another challenge I just had no idea existed. It's really hard for folks in these very rural places to enforce things like traffic laws, let alone kind of be the water police. And so, yeah, even though Tulare County, the other region I was working in, has their own set of issues, it was clear that just the number of resources and folks and community-based organizations they had working on the issues, like literally a physical number of people working on the issues, made a big difference. And so I don't know exactly what opportunities lie for the state there to help Lake County, but it's definitely important to be aware that there's literally just like not enough people to work on these issues that are very important. And of course, with wildfire season coming up, they're going to have their many issues just like right at their fingertips they have to deal with in a short amount of time, and probably not enough folks to even help with those issues. So I know that's a little depressing, but it was very eye-opening for me and makes me feel like the work was very meaningful, and hopefully I can continue working in the water space moving forward because I see how important it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm sure they really appreciated your support. Definitely sounds like all hands are appreciated there. We
Yeah.
have a hand up from Nikki. Happy to open it up to you to ask your question, Nikki.
Hi, awesome presentation. Really cool work.
Thank you.
I would love to know just a little bit more about the drought risk assessments that you conducted, in particular the methodology and like time horizons and data sources that you used. Just curious.
Yeah. So my supervisor, actually, Julie, who's on this call, was responsible for developing that tool. And you can view it as sort of it synthesizes other data sets and kind of is like it's like throws up a red flag, like, oh, this issue is probably contributing greatly to this particular region's overall risk to drought. And so that's I don't know if you can see, it's kind of small on the screen, but there's a snapshot, like a screenshot of the tool, what it looks like online there on the lower right-hand side. And it's a map of California. And like I said, it takes into account different factors. So anything from wildfire risk or fractured rock, or whether there's the presence of emergency interties or not, all the way to groundwater basin status, as well as socioeconomic status of the folks who live in that region. So all these factors are taken into account overall. Looks like Bethany dropped a link to the map, to the tool, in the chat if you want to check it out. But I had access to I could filter through each different factor or indicator, and then write a little I wrote like an analysis, like a small blurb kind of summarizing and why that might be impactful to a region's overall vulnerability. And so it draws from data from various different sources. There's actually a document on the Department of Water Resources website. I wish I had the link right now. I can drop it in a minute after I find it. But there is a document where it has the methodology for how this tool, kind of what data this tool uses. So like CalAdapt, a lot of other kind of data sets that are already out there is where it draws a lot of its information to then synthesize and summarize these particular indicators, like I mentioned. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. And yeah, I think I was going to ask a follow-up question of whether you'd used CalAdapt and like what kind of future climate risk projections you'd use, but it sounds like you were going off of CalAdapt.
Yeah, that's some of the factors draw from CalAdapt, but there's like 20 different indicators the tool takes into account when assessing overall drought risk. So each indicator draws from its own data source. It looks like Bethany dropped another link here. Thank you, Bethany. Which is the Department of Water Resource website that has the links to the recommendations that were guiding this work that I was working on, as well as this online web tool and the document that provides the methodology for this tool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Marlis. So go ahead and give another virtual round of applause for your awesome service and great job answering those questions. So next up, we're going to hear from Bethany Rader Ruelas, who also served the California Department of Water Resources. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Bethany.
Thanks, Kaylee. And as Kaylee and Marlis both said, I served alongside Marlis, piloting the same recommendations, which came from the same reports. My area was with small water systems versus the counties that and self-supplied communities that Marlis worked with. So my work was to implement water shortage contingency plans for small water systems. As Marla said, current state law requires water shortage contingency planning for urban water systems, but leaves out small water systems. Unfortunately, given their limited technical, managerial, and financial resources, the small water systems are less likely to be able to plan for water shortage or drought emergencies if there's not some type of mandate in place and corresponding support. So my work was to build capacity for these small water systems and to identify and document the needs of small water systems to be able to develop their own plans in the future. The process of water shortage contingency planning can be seen in the diagram in the middle. But the focus of my work is not really to explain to you all here how water shortage contingency planning works, but really to communicate and articulate the needs that were identified from my work in the process. So I worked with 2 small water systems primarily. One was a public water system that was surface water dependent and served 4,500 customers in Lake County. And the other was a private or mutual water company in Los Angeles County, which served 7,500 customers and is groundwater dependent. Though I worked with those 2 systems primarily, I also worked with other small water systems in each of those regions in sort of a collaborative effort to identify some of the needs of these small water systems. Part of my work also entailed giving presentations to the small water systems on how to develop a water shortage contingency plan and get their feedback on that. So while I only worked with 2 systems directly, and I only developed 2 water shortage contingency plans for these systems, I did get a lot of feedback from probably 40 or more other small water systems, and those interactions, as well as my experience in developing the plans for Canocti County Water District and Valencia Heights Water Company, those interactions are how I identified these needs. One of the greatest needs that I identified in developing these plans and working with the small systems was the need for clarity around water pricing rules, regulations, and laws in California. Water pricing is one of the greatest tools and mechanisms that we have as water managers available to us currently to manage the demand of consumers. Certainly education is right up there, but when it affects their pocketbooks, it gets their attention, and that sends a price signal to the consumer. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of lawsuits against water companies for implementing price-based water conservation mechanisms, and it's a very complex system of water laws and regulations, which as should come as no surprise to anybody who works in the water world. And even the community-based organizations that I reached out to get help in trying to understand how to implement water pricing for these systems, many of them didn't have the answers that I needed in order to help these systems utilize that as a tool. And so I've identified that as one of the greatest needs. And another really important one is the need for support in metering. A lot of these small water systems don't have metered customers. And if you don't have meters, you're not paying volumetrically. It's very difficult to incentivize conservation when you get as much water as you want for the same price. And perhaps one of the most, I guess, groundbreaking needs I identified is this need or really opportunity for collaboration between urban water systems who have been doing these water conservation plans for several years now, and the opportunity that exists for them to collaborate with small water systems to share their technical managerial resources so that the small water systems aren't having to reinvent the wheel. They can learn and draw from the experiences of urban water systems who have been doing this for a long time now, because technical, managerial, and financial resources are incredibly limited for these small water systems. And a relationship between an urban water system and a small water system could help them to mitigate the technical and managerial resources limitations that they face. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bethany. A fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed hearing all those highlights of the needs that you identified through your projects. We'd love to open it up again for some Q&A. So feel free to raise your hand or drop a question in the chat box and I can read it off for you. Just following up on your last point, Bethany, are there any examples or case studies that already exist where an urban water supplier has that relationship with a small water supplier that folks could look at as an example?
No, not that I'm aware of. And I certainly searched for such a relationship. Although, to be fair, when I was doing this work, because water shortage contingency plans have not been developed for small water systems, the only place I had to look was to these urban water systems. And every system that I reached out to, every community-based organization I reached out to was very amenable and made time, carved out several hours to meet with me and help me to understand this. There is a current program within the Department of Water Resources in which all water systems need to earn continuing education credits. And so it's my recommendation to the department will be that they might incentivize this type of relationship between the small water systems and the urban water systems through their continuing education credit program. Thanks, Kaylee.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. That sounds like a really ripe place for more knowledge exchange to be happening.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there's a space created there which might work, but we'll see, right?
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Looks like you got a lot of great shout outs in the chat box. Just looking at timing, we'll go ahead and move on to our next presentation. But if you have any other questions for Bethany, feel free to put those through the chat. And all fellows presenting today too, please feel free to put in your LinkedIn account, email address, any follow-up place where folks can reach out to you after today. So now we're going to go ahead and hear from Nicole Chang, who served the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Climate Plan. Go ahead and pass it over to you, Nicole.
Thank you. As Kaylee mentioned, I was serving Climate Plan. They're like a network organization that focuses on transportation, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is a regional transportation planning organization. And my project was to find alignment between urban water management plans and the regional transportation plan of the Bay Area, which we call Plan Bay Area 2050. I think the outcome was hopefully to find more implementation action, but I think realistically is probably more opportunities for MTC to learn about the water challenges in the Bay Area. So in terms of like connecting the regional transportation plan and water supply planning, because the regional transportation plan is like a vision of how the region can grow, and that's going to affect water efficiency and also water supply. So within the implementation plan that MTC was developing, they have like two strategies. One was providing means-based retrofits for energy, water supply, wildfire kind of upgrades for buildings. And then the other one that I wanted to focus on was on, I think this one wasn't in the plan, but I think they should better coordinate with water agencies and equity organizations to kind of align the infrastructure funding and planning. And so I think urban water management plans were very helpful with like the first one in terms of building retrofits, because obviously water agencies have a lot of expertise in water conservation, and the demand management section in the urban water management plans were very helpful in identifying what already is there in like in terms of like water conservation, and it could be like a place where MCC could look to fill the potential gaps, specifically maybe for like the smaller city agencies that maybe don't have like this kind of technical capacity. And then I was thinking MCC could coordinate with water agencies and equity organizations. On the next slide, I believe there's a map, but I'll stay on this slide just to talk a little bit about the next steps. So collaborating, MCC is going to be in their partnership phase. So I think it's good for them to collaborate with local organizations to kind of implement the actions that they said that they're going to do that would like retrofit the buildings and improve like equity. And then this one's for climate plan. It's to expand the partnerships creating that I created during the project. And then on the next slide, there is a map that kind of just shows the regional collaboratives in the Bay Area that focus on land use and water integration. The purple circles are the regional collaboratives, and then the rest of them are just like the water agencies, cities, and the nonprofits that are a part of this. And this could be just like a place where MCC could go in and, I guess, if they're invited in also, and kind of connect with water agencies and equity organizations so they could better like collaborate with each other on these kind of implementation actions. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. And yeah, echoing Atlee's shout out. Thank you for 2 years of service to Civic Spark. It's been really awesome to see how you've grown through the program and what this last year has looked like for you. So we'll go ahead and open it up to questions again. I see we have a hand raised by Thomas. Please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually not so much a question. We were working with Nicole, and I just wanted to share our appreciation for the hard work she did, as well as Civic Spark. Nicole definitely got traction in this area where we've been trying to get traction for a long time, and having her presence in there with the land use planners and staying persistent with this topic has definitely resulted in a few things, including water supply showing up in some white papers. And she also helped set up a forum and a discussion with some land use and housing advocates that were completely unaware of the restrictions that we're having with water supply in California and wasn't on their radar at all. So she definitely made a meaningful contribution to the industry. Appreciate the effort.
Awesome. Yeah, big round of applause. Hats off to you, Nicole. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for sharing, Thomas, about some of the accomplishments and impacts that Nicole's work has had this year. Yeah, I see a question in the chat from Nikki. Where can we learn more about this work?
I think, sorry, for some reason, I don't have an answer to that. I know Climate Plan I was doing a report for Climate Plan and it's on their website. I could link that. It has a better, summary of like how these issues connect and some of the recommendations. And then Climate Plan will also probably publish the policy framework that I was working on that could better align the regional transportation plan and the urban water management plans.
Awesome. Wonderful. I just advanced to your question slide 2, which has your email addresses as well. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole, again for your service. Not seeing any other questions. We will go ahead and move on to our next presentation for today. Let's see, next up, we're going to hear from Rebecca Berg, who also served the California Department of Water Resources this year. So go ahead and hand it over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Kaylee. So as Kaylee mentioned, my name is Rebecca Berg. I am also a second-year fellow with Civic Spark. I've been serving with the Department of Water Resources for 2 years now, specifically working with the Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Program within the Integrated Regional Water Management Program. This year specifically, I've been working with my beneficiary, the Amamutsun Tribal Band and Land Trust. And with both of these agencies, we have done a number of projects, specifically with tribal engagement in the Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Program, both at the regional and statewide level. Regionally, I work to assist the Amamutsun Tribal Band and Land Trust in research and activities to better engage with the Central Coast funding area. This involved doing presentations to IRWM regions, as well as one-on-one meetings with water agencies and organizations that the tribe felt could be good partners for them, either with current or future project work. And then statewide, my co-fellow Brian and I have been working with the IRWM Roundtable of Regions to develop a tribal caucus that would give California tribes a space to collaborate and discuss shared interests. And with this project, we've developed 2 listening sessions where we got feedback from tribal representatives about their input on how they would like this caucus to be developed, what they think would be the most beneficial. And we also developed an outline that kind of synthesizes all that information to hopefully get more feedback. And this work feeds into some broader statewide work that I did, specifically with the statewide Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program needs assessment. And this report summarizes the needs assessments of the 12 funding areas that were designated through Proposition 1. And it reflects findings from program implementation, along with challenges and opportunities related to the water needs in underrepresented communities and tribes across the state. And we're expecting to publish this report in early August. In addition, as a result of some of the feedback we got from that needs assessment, as well as conversations with current grantees within that Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Program, my co-fellow and I, Brian, are developing a resource to help underrepresented communities and tribes to be more successful with the DWR grants process. And so these projects all work to accomplish the goals of supporting effective stakeholder engagement, relationship building, and collaborative project development, as well as expanding the understanding of resources needed to ensure a more successful grant process, specifically for underrepresented communities and tribes who often struggle with this. So some outcomes from these programs, both at the state and regional level, include being able to better communicate the needs of local communities to the state, directing resources where they are most needed, helping to guide future funding, and aiding the regions in better collaboration among themselves, as well as sharing resources or best practices among communities and across the state. So some next steps. A couple of these projects are still in the development stage, specifically the Grants Best Practices resource and the Roundtable of Regions Tribal Caucus. So with the Grants Best Practices resource, we are working on developing a guidance document as well as a webinar series. And both of these are currently in development. We are hoping that the document will be finalized within the next couple months, and that we will be able to develop a webinar series with speakers that can discuss their experiences with each phase of the grants process. This would include both IRWM practitioners and current grantees within the Prop 1 program, as well as grant managers and grant supervisors within DWR itself. And with the Tribal Caucus, some next steps we're looking forward to is we're hoping to advance tribal involvement within the current roundtable meetings and activities. And then once we get that outline out that we developed from the listening sessions, we're hoping to hold some follow-up meetings to continue the development of the caucus. And that the goal is for that to be spearheaded by tribal representatives themselves. And we're just there as a supporting role. So that's a pretty a short overview of the work that I accomplished this year. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. Fantastic presentation and project. This is such important work that you've been doing. And I'm really excited about those two next steps that you highlighted. I'm curious, how can we stay up to date on those resources and the Tribal Caucus and maybe a webinar series over the next few months?
Yeah, so the Tribal Caucus currently, if you're involved in the IWM Round Table of Regions, you're probably hearing about it, but the current development is kind of within the tribal sphere at the moment, because that is a group that will be for tribes and run by tribes. So we're there as a supporting role. And then with the grants best practices resource, we're hoping that that information will come out before the Proposition 1 Round 2 implementation solicitation. So that should be hopefully in the fall or early winter. So you can likely look out for some of that information around then. Some of that work will be taken on by the next cohort of DWR fellows.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. I'm curious, I think this, this is such an important project and you did such a good job of putting all of the highlights into this poster. You make it sound so easy, but I'm sure this is a really challenging project and complex dynamic issues to work on. So I'm curious if you're willing to highlight, maybe one of the largest challenges that you experienced and how you went about trying to overcome it, or working with others to try to look at it and pick it apart and observe it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest projects was definitely the statewide needs assessment. That's actually a project I've been working on for both of my service years. And that was, I think the biggest challenge with that was every funding area, which there are 12 of, kind of took the needs assessment and adapted it to their own needs. So there was no kind of universal structure for which the needs assessments were put together. And my kind of job was to make each funding area, look like it had all the same information, and to pull out challenges and opportunities from each funding area, tribal engagement. And so to be able to go through all of those needs assessments that were all incredibly different and fit it into a very structured format was definitely a challenge.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple more follow-up questions. So I think we have time at least for one of them. We'll start with Nikki, just following up on that needs assessment that you mentioned. Does it only consider current and historic data, or also future projection models of water needs?
Yeah, so the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program is really unique in that it looks at water needs on a very human level instead of a technical level. So we're not as much looking at historic data, but more of it. Well, obviously this was done at the funding area level, but it was more of having, community meetings and talking on the ground to the people who are affected by these issues about what their needs are and what their challenges are. And there are definitely some technical aspects to that as well, with water agencies definitely in the mix of that conversation as well. But it more focuses on, how do we engage disadvantaged communities and tribes in the most effective way, and how do we address some of that historical like lack of representation and issues like that. So that's kind of the areas that we're focusing on with the statewide needs assessment. The funding area needs assessments themselves do have a lot more of that technical data, but the statewide needs assessment, we are kind of focusing on that more of a human level of, as a society, what do those communities need in order to be effectively engaged and work on these issues that they're facing. Thank
you. Really helpful clarification there. I think we have time for Mackenzie's question. So I'll go ahead and pose it to you. How do you feel you've grown as a professional over the past 2 years of your service with DWR?
That's a good question, Genzi. I think these past years have been pretty like transformative for me. I started Civic Spark right after graduating from undergrad, and personally have seen just my growth in my confidence in being able to do this work. Just as I've gotten more and more experience in it, and especially with the second year of service, being able to take on a lot more responsibility, and kind of spearheading some of these projects, with that knowledge, and confidence going into working with the Amamutsun Tribal Band, and having that background of working with this program last year as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your service, Rebecca. Amazing job, and thank you so much for everything you've shared with us today. You got a lot of good questions there. All right, so one more round of applause for Rebecca. Thank you so much. And next up, we're going to hear from Brian Redden, who's going to round out our presentations today from the California Department of Water Resources. We'll go ahead and move on to Brian's presentation. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Kaylee. Okay, so yeah, my project kind of builds off of some of the work that, as Rebecca has mentioned, is done regarding building capacity for tribes and disadvantaged communities. So to give some brief background, so in connection with the SAFER program and with the help of Prop 1 funding, the Department of Water Resources is implementing a program to build capacity with tribes and disadvantaged communities to ensure more meaningful involvement in the integrated regional water management program. This is all part of an overall strategy to help ensure that all Californians, especially tribes and disadvantaged communities, have access to safe and reliable water. So of course, my host agency as well was the Department of Water Resources, and my local beneficiary was the San Diego County Water Authority. Some additional overview. So as a fellow, I worked with the Tribal Policy Advisor's Office as well as the Financial Assistance Branch to help identify some areas of mutual concern, develop meaningful relationships with tribes, and assist in some of DWR's efforts to provide technical and financial assistance to communities throughout the San Diego County region. The program is meant to assist DWR in its efforts to increase tribes and disadvantaged communities' resiliency, as well as ability to respond to various water management challenges, especially in the face of ongoing climate change. So some main deliverables that I had worked on along with Rebecca over the period of the service term. First one being the IRWM survey. This survey was developed with the help of DWR staff to better understand some of the water capacity and funding needs relating to IRWM. So this started developing this in November of 2020, and we'd sent it out around March of this year, and gained a few responses from some of the reservations and communities in the San Diego County region. We hope to use the information from gathered from the survey to help DWR better understand how to provide more ongoing technical and financial assistance to those communities. Secondly, the grants best practices resource. As Rebecca had already mentioned, it's essentially a compilation of tips, suggestions, and best practices that is meant to help tribes and disadvantaged communities help navigate the state grant funding process. Also to help ensure more equity in the process for all potential grantees now and into the future, mainly consisting of a guidance document and a webinar series. And finally is a tribal caucus / listening sessions. This came from actually suggestion from May of 2020 during a Tribal Water Summit webinar series that Rebecca and another co-fellow by the name of Monty Ontiveros had done last year. Some participants some participants from this webinar series had suggested putting together a sort of tribal caucus or additional governance structure, along with the IRWM Roundtable of Regions, so that tribal water needs could be provided, could provide input to the state regarding those matters. So we had 2 listening sessions this past May, where we had tribal participants from around the state discuss some of the opportunities as well as challenges as to what this potential structure could look like and how DWR could help serve in a more supportive role. So as far as some goals that were helped accomplish by some of the deliverables I had done were to better engage tribes in IRWM, elevate the voices and perspectives of tribes throughout California, establish and convene venues for collaboration input to the state, as well as provide support to tribes and disadvantaged communities in the form of best practices with the state grant application and implementation process. Finally, expand capacity building of tribal communities for now and into the future. And so what's next for DWR? Hope to use the IRWM survey as sort of a model or template for future DWR surveys. Hopefully incorporate more, I guess, more themes and subjects identifying not only with IRWM, but other maybe water capacity or additional sustainability needs. As well as implement future webinars as part of the grants best practice resource. Due to time constraints, we're not able to put this webinar series in place, but we're hoping to create some sort of outline or document to hopefully outline for future fellows and DWR staff how to conduct the series later on, as well as use the tribal caucus outline that we've developed as guidance to continue building support for the caucus and hopefully bring it to fruition in a couple of years. And finally, just find additional opportunities to increase tribal engagement in the Roundtable of Regions later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian, and another fantastic presentation. Again, we'd like to open it up to any questions you might have. I have one from Atlee Keller here. Do you see any ways that DWR and other departments of or agencies can utilize this work to better engage tribes beyond just IRWM, but maybe other topic areas as well?
Yeah, so I guess, especially relating to the IRWM survey, being able to use different tools in general for different agencies, whether it's with the Department of Water Resources, maybe the state water boards or other agencies, it could certainly be broadened with the right support and help. I see this, for instance, like interagency collaboration. There certainly can be a lot more done using tools such as surveys in the future to help understand more, I guess, unearth more information relating to different sustainability issues.
Absolutely. Wonderful. I see you're getting some really great shout outs, both Rebecca and Brian in the chat box. Wonderful. I'm curious, Brian, if you can share, you mentioned that, you know, the survey could be a model just in terms of including a lot of different topic areas within the survey. Curious if there's any other unique aspects of the survey or things that you think made it successful and could be used as a model for the future.
Yeah, so I guess kind of tying in with that, there's of course some information that I suppose some tribal communities are not willing to share, at least just in a survey. But with the right support, of course, with some of the, I guess, clout and other resources that the Policy Advisor's Office was able to provide, just being able to learn more in general about, more specifically about maybe how the reservation, how many water systems they have, what were some things they were willing to talk about. Just a couple questions we had were just for them to basically say whatever was on their mind, whether it's relating to the survey or not, and just providing any additional information that maybe they were not able to provide beforehand, whether it's through a survey or other communication tools. So I feel like just providing a reaching hand through these surveys and being transparent about I guess the overall purpose for why we want to do these sort of surveys and other resources for tribes and other disadvantaged communities, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about that survey. Really appreciate it. Yeah, awesome. Congratulations. And I'm not seeing any other questions come through. So another round of applause to Brian and also Rebecca, who both worked in this space this year. And next up, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presentation. So we're going to hear from Andrew Bake, who is served with the Mendocino County Water Agency. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Andrew.
Oh, there we go. Can everyone hear me? Oh, perfect. Thank you, Kaylee, for the introduction. So I was placed with the Mendocino County Water Agency and served there for the past year. And the majority of my work has been focused on the SIGMA process, getting the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency sort of pushing forward since Ukiah Valley is a medium priority basin designated under DWR's guidelines. There's been a lot of work on the groundwater sphere here, especially in the past year with the recent drought. So it's been a really exciting place to serve and collaborate with a lot of other individuals and entities. A lot of my work is focused on conducting outreach and just trying to inform the population about some of the damages that lack of groundwater can have. The Ukiah Valley itself is quite interesting. If you can sort of see the bottom right picture there, that's a little map outline of the basin. And it's the Ukiah Valley, the actual plain has a really solid groundwater source, but all the surrounding communities sort of suffer from lack of unreliable groundwater access. So it's been sort of trying to communicate to a lot of the entities outside of the central Ukiah area, as well as the 6 tribal nations located within the basin boundaries, the importance of participating in this groundwater program and providing their feedback. To that end, we've held several public meetings throughout the year, just trying to get people involved. And we actually think since COVID restrictions have somewhat lifted, we had our first in-person public meeting last week, which was broadly attended. And it was nice to actually see everyone in person, which was pretty cool. And a lot of the work there was done on just informing people, obviously, but also working with each of the entities that make up the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency and the tribal nations who will participate in the process too, on crafting these project and management actions, which will sort of be part of the guiding plan going forward as part of the groundwater sustainability plan. And so these project and management actions are all sort of designed to help prevent these 6 sustainability indicators, which if any of those fall into the red, that means the plan has not failed, but needs some remediation. And so a lot of these are capital projects or water conservation projects, and all sort of geared towards protecting the groundwater resource for future generations to come. Thankfully, we haven't necessarily had instances of groundwater decline such as you see in the Central Valley or places like that, but there's a certain amount of interconnected surface water and groundwater exchange that we are trying to safeguard in the valley. And especially working with some of the tribal nations who they collect, one tribe in particular collects reeds for basket weaving and things like that. And trying to protect that interconnected surface water has been really important to make sure they can continue using their practicing their cultural practices. And since Ukiah Valley Basin is a disadvantaged community, a lot of our work has also been, or a lot of my work has been doing a lot of outreach with private landowners and working with the county and city on drilling monitoring wells so we can actually understand, have a better data source going forward of what the groundwater looks like in the valley. And actually the wells, 4 of the 6 wells are going to be drilled the week after I leave, which is a little bittersweet to see, but I'm glad that it's going to happen, and we'll have a solid data source going forward. And then this plan will be submitted in January of 2022 to the DWR, and hopefully it gets passed. And we've got a great team of consultants working on the program too. But it's been a really good year for building skills and building communication and learning how to navigate the difference between local politics and personal politics. And it's been really really fun year, and was excited to serve here at the water agency.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. And another great presentation, huge body of work that you have focused on this last year. So opening it up to some questions, I see one right away from Abby. She says, you mentioned in your poster you're staying on part-time with the water agency. Will you be continuing on your current work you've done as a Civic Spark Fellow, or focusing on something new?
Most of my work will be continuing on some of this public outreach, since the water agency actually transitioned halfway through my service term from the executive office of the county to the Department of Transportation. So I was at one point the only water agency employee, which was kind of interesting. So just continuing staying on part-time to help continue some of those outreach efforts and communication efforts with the relevant entities that we've been in communication with. But it's been I've met a lot of people and know a lot of smart people up here who are all really concerned about the situation. So it's good to know there's a lot of people working on the problem.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations to be able to continue to work on this. Awesome. I see, let's see, we also have a question from Atlee. Atlee, do you want to ask your question directly?
Yeah, definitely. I was just wondering if the GSA has looked to basins that have already submitted their GSPs in 2020 and gotten any lessons learned from that process.
Yeah, I neglected to mention it during my presentation, but one of the sticking points of the GSA has been how we're actually going to like pay for it in the long term. And so we're taking a lot of lessons from the Salinas Valley GSA in particular, as they have a similar, not similarly sized or anything, but they have an interesting funding strategy that we're trying to copy, because obviously it needs to be paid for. And that's been the biggest sticking point, is how we're going to pay for it. So if we get probably the only reason we get our plan rejected is if we didn't have a good funding plan long term, because the state doesn't want to step in and continue to fund some of these smaller GSAs going forward for in the long term, especially the admin and things like that. So this is all of the stuff I present on the technical side, but the actual nitty gritty funding aspect has been a lot of interesting conversations between the members.
Thanks, Andrew.
We've got time for one more question. I see one from Corey in the chat box. How have you navigated communicating the complex concepts of groundwater with the stakeholders you've worked with this year?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that credit definitely has to go to the consultants who are well versed in this and have done a lot of work in other disadvantaged communities throughout Northern California. But a lot of it is just sort of focusing on like sort of key issues, like, and breaking it down to sort of basic, simple terms, like how are we going to protect this groundwater recharge? How are we going to, can we help you like protect, like build out your agricultural storage ponds? Can we help? A lot of it has to do with water conservation. Like Marlis and Bethany were working on projects in Lake County, and we're part of a similar drought task force here in Mendocino County. And a lot of that has to do with like personal water conservation, indoor, outdoor water use. And just those small measures in aggregate make a huge difference, especially in a small basin like ours. And I think that's sort of how we've tried to communicate it. And then we've had a number of members of the public who've experienced with working in water systems in different areas of California and the US that have participated in our programs, in our public meetings too. And their questions have really helped sort of guide our discussions going forward and what we sort of choose to focus on.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, another round of applause to you. Thank you so much for your service. And really looking forward to hearing how your next steps go, continuing on these projects. So congratulations. And we'll go ahead and move on to our next presentation. We have two more for today. And this one will be from Madeline Travis, who served with the County of San Luis Obispo. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Madeline.
Thank you, Kaylee. Hello, everybody. So my role serving with the County of San Luis Obispo Public Works Department was a little different in that rather than say, looking at stormwater capture through the lens of focusing on how to implement one particular project start to finish, my whole aim was to stay in the weeds, so to speak, of stormwater capture and really identifying and analyzing the obstacles to stormwater capture implementation. So to provide a little bit of context, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in 2014, calling in basins to be brought into sustainability by 2040. So in San Luis Obispo County, we have a medley of different conditions. Politically, there's a lot of different watersheds, there's a lot of different factors going on. We established the fact that conservation practices alone will not suffice in order to bring the basins into sustainability. So that's where the concept of stormwater capture comes in as a method in order to augment local groundwater supplies, which in theory is an excellent concept. Granted, we just had a 200-year storm that completely breached our local waterways. And we're witnessing this more and more with the effects of climate change intensifying, right? And so in theory, in order to harness some of that excess stormwater as it passes through before finding its way to sea, the idea is to sink it, slow it, and spread it back into the landscape. So having established that, my role was to come in as a fellow and assist the county in understanding what's preventing stormwater capture from getting off the ground, and in what context might there be some feasible methods to explore, really through collecting and analyzing stormwater capture from the perspectives of the community, the countywide community. So through taking a look at the policy level, permitting and regulatory considerations, as well as, of course, understanding the financial considerations and the legal issues inherent to stormwater capture. So my role is to carry out concurrent outreach and research, and then ultimately compile all of that into a guidance document to be used by the county and any interested project proponent looking to better understand, what needs to be done in order to get some local stormwater capture projects or programs underway. So having established a subcommittee of the Water Resources Advisory Committee that serves the Board of Supervisors, I was fortunate to have the support within the county of meeting once a month, 4 or 5 months, to discuss these issues, as well as carrying out targeted outreach to a plethora of different organizations I received the support from in order to understand what pilot projects are going on in other Mediterranean climates, sharing similar conditions as the County of SLO. And in doing so, sort of arrived at a few fundamental focus points, the first of which being an emphasis of stormwater capture on rural land. You can see pictured in the upper right-hand corner a infiltration recharge basin that a local landowner in the Cambria area got off the ground with the support of our local resource conservation districts. So essentially the idea being, you can create an unlined swimming pool in your property and encourage some of that extra stormwater to recharge into the underlying aquifer. You have yourself a successful recharge basin with a minimal operation and maintenance. Another alternative to that is engaging in these flood managed aquifer recharge practices, or that is, if you see these recharge basins running at capacity, where are some other available land sources to help encourage that extra water to get into the ground. So they're looking at Floodmore, coined by the Department of Water Resources as a strategy to help recharge local groundwater supplies with this extra water, and having these conversations with the community. Uncertainty to crop impacts was identified as a major obstacle that I continued to look at throughout my fellowship, and understanding how other pilot projects have analyzed their impacts to crops over a period of time, as well as availability of funding sources, of course, to get projects off the ground, viable incentives for multiple benefit projects, being that stormwater capture projects are inherently able to provide multiple benefits. So the landowner is to put a project on their property, which in turn provides basin-wide benefits. How might there be some partnerships made to help offset cost and share some of the costs of that project in order to actualize the multiple benefits, which might look like reduced erosion, flood control, ecosystem services, improved water quality, and of course, augmented water supplies. The legal uncertainties proved to be a continuously re-emerging issue, which will be helpful moving forward to have specialized conversations surrounding, as my role as a fellow is really to pinpoint the different obstacles going on without offering legal expertise. Then of course, the length and cost of the permitting process was identified as a major obstacle to stormwater capture getting off the ground in the county, as well as subjecting your land to further regulations, potential environmental impacts, water quality implications, and just a general lack of local pilot projects and programs that have been rolled out in order to get an understanding of how that might translate to the county's conditions. So wrapping all of this up, having really stayed immersed in the weeds throughout my service, I'm compiling all of this into this final guidance document and offering some next steps, looking like increasing capacity and continuing conversations, both in the forms of formal committees moving forward and just carrying out at the stakeholder level conversations surrounding these topics, the allocation of a watershed coordinator in order to help facilitate projects and increase interbasin collaboration and communication, looking to programmatic permits in order to help streamline the permitting process for project proponents, future engagement at the local level, taking it out of the county's hands. It looks like at that landowner water district, smaller scale level is really where opportunity exists for more feasible pilot projects and programs, with opportunity for crop insurance incentives to extend to floodmar projects, as well as taking it down to the smallest scale of best management practices with technology such as land contouring with use of keyline plows or other technology available at the county. So in summation, stormwater capture appears to be feasible if we are to continue carrying forward with collaboration and just taking on innovative solutions in order to try to get this roll out at the local level. Thank you for hearing me out, the work that I've been trying to accomplish.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madeline. Yeah, really appreciate you for diving in, pun intended, into stormwater capture. Personally, as your original regional coordinator for the service year, I am so impressed by how much you've learned and how much you've contributed to the County of San Luis Obispo this year. So personal congratulations from me while I have the floor. And be happy to take any questions. I see we already have a hand raised from Nikki. Please go ahead and ask your question, Nikki.
Awesome, Madeline, great presentation. And folks will probably notice that my questions are following a similar theme of climate risk. What can I say? That's my job. But I'm wondering, Madeline, if how future projections of storm storms, major storms factored into this analysis? Was that something considered under environmental impacts? Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for answering that question. I started off at the beginning of my fellowship really leaning on Sustainable Conservation's groundwater recharge assessment tool, which will essentially compile all the different considerations and climate projections in order to offer, feasible alternatives. So the tricky thing is we're unable to predict precisely years into the future, right? What's going to be worthwhile depending on the level of infrastructure necessary for a project. If say there's, 3 dry years and then 1 good wet year for a stormwater capture project, what does that look like compared to other water supply augmentation strategies? But it's clear that regardless, in order to receive state funding and IRWM funding, that integrating climate adaptation benefits is going to be really important in order to get projects funded. And it's also clear that at the smallest best management practice scale, that healthy soils offer the additional benefit of sequestering water, holding on to more soil moisture, and also helping to sequester carbon as well. So that's an interesting nexus that will continue to be explored, figuring out how to integrate climate benefits and recharge benefits moving forward. They go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
Awesome. Thank you, Madeline. And we've got one more question from Abby. You mentioned the final guidance document will include your feedback and findings. How broadly will that be shared? Or will it just be shared amongst the County of San Luis Obispo?
Yeah, I think we were starting off talking about having it just be an internal document for the benefit of the county. And then as it's evolved, it's looking like it may be externally facing, but we're still figuring that out as we're wrapping up our conversations in the next week and a half, how we're going to share it and what venues. So I'll keep you posted. Thank
Wonderful.
you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, please keep us updated. All right, congratulations, Madeline. Thank you so much for a great presentation. We'll go ahead and move on to our last presentation of the day. Last but not least, we'll hear from Desiree Saucelli, who served with Valley Water.
Hi, yeah, so as Katie mentioned, I'm Desiree Saucelli, and I have been serving Valley Water, formerly known as Santa Clara Valley Water District, in their Water Supply Planning and Conservation Unit. Valley Water is a special district that serves over 2 million people in Santa Clara County, and they have a mission to provide safe, clean water supply, flood protection, and stream stewardship. And part of their responsibility to achieve this mission is managing their 10 surface water reservoirs. I have spent my term working on developing a CE Qual W2 water temperature model for Anderson Reservoir to help support their operation efforts. And if you follow water news closely, perhaps you've seen that Anderson is currently being drained to allow for a seismic retrofit of the dam. However, during typical operations, Anderson releases into Coyote Creek, which is a stream that provides habitat for threatened fish species in the South Bay. And the survival of these fish is contingent on having suitable habitat, so both enough water and at the right temperatures to survive and reproduce. Anderson releases play a huge role in providing the appropriate flows for the fish populations. And so understanding the temperature dynamics within the reservoir and the effect of those on the temperature of the releases from Anderson will help reservoir operators make more informed decisions about when and where to release water from. It's not really economically or even physically feasible to be constantly measuring temperature at every point within the reservoir. And so that's where the water temperature model becomes a really useful tool, because it essentially simulates how temperature changes throughout a water body based off of various input data. And so I'll get a little bit into the model development process, because that was the bulk of my service term. A lot of my time was spent collecting and analyzing all of this data that helps support the model. Anderson is Valley Water's largest reservoir, and so there's a number of inflows and outflows that I needed the flow rates for, and also the temperatures of. Accurate meteorological data is also really important for temperature dynamics. obviously air temperature plays a big role in the water temperature, but wind speed and direction can have a large impact on the mixing within the reservoir as well. And I was able to collect all this data both from in-house sources and using public databases from USGS, NOAA, and CIMMYS, which were very helpful. Although anyone who has worked with data knows that it is rarely, if ever, perfect, and this project was certainly no exception. I had to be pretty creative when it came to identifying and addressing data gaps, and essentially just figuring out ways to fill in holes in my data so that I was still accurately representing, what was happening at the time to allow for a longer model simulation period. But once those issues were resolved, I moved on to actually building the model. So putting together all my input files and getting the model running. After that, the last steps of the development process are calibration and validation. So fine-tuning certain model parameters so that your model results are better matching with the actual measurements taken within the water body. So basically just making sure that your model is accurately representing the water body you're trying to simulate. And having completed the model, the specific platform I used has a lot of really cool ways to visualize and interpret the data. Don't have time to get into all of them, but I have here as an example, 2 profiles of the reservoir taken at 2 different times of the year. So this is looking specifically at temperature contours here on the right, and you can really see how the temperature is changing both with space and time within the reservoir. And this is really useful information for reservoir operators because with Anderson specifically, they do have some flexibility when it comes to releasing water. Anderson has multiple outlet portals at varying elevations. So, in the winter here on the left, when the water within the reservoir is pretty homogeneous, all around the same temperature, relatively cold, operators could pull water from the upper outlet without really having to worry if water is too cold for the fish downstream. However, as the year goes on and then the reservoir stratifies in the summer, you can see on the right, they're no longer going to be able to pull from that upper portal because the water is too warm for the fish populations downstream, and they're going to have to shift their operations to pull from the lower outlets to sort of reach that cool water storage. And so this model I developed can also be coupled with a stream temperature model for operators to get a better idea of how reservoir releases may impact flow and temperature in downstream reaches, which is really useful. And so that's basically what this modeling tool for this agency to use to better understand what's happening in the reservoir so that they're able to make management decisions that are better informed to help them achieve their mission of safe water supply and also environmental stewardship. Yeah, that's all I really had. Does anyone have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Desiree. Yeah, we have got a few questions already. I'll go ahead and read off the first one. So from Andrew, is there a plan to augment flows from Anderson Reservoir to mitigate the impact on Coyote Creek, given that Anderson is the biggest reservoir, a plan to protect Valley Water's water supply?
So I don't know how much I can really speak to the specific reservoir operations. That was just developing a tool for them to use. There are things going on at Valley Water. I don't know how much I can speak to, but in terms of protecting Valley Water's water supply, we are in a drought, but if you go onto their website, you can see that this project to drain Anderson and seismic retrofit the dam has been in process for a while, and they have taken into account all the needs to make sure that they have enough water for the people of Santa Clara County. So people shouldn't be concerned with not having enough water if we're all being wise about our water usage. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, maybe you two can connect offline too and talk about some different factors too that you might be able to share. So moving to Nikki's question, what are some examples of other types of scenarios that were simulated?
So this project hasn't looked into scenarios to be simulated yet. This was sort of just developing the base model to make sure that Anderson was accurately modeled, but it can be used it will be used in the future to sort of assess what kind of effects the releases are going to be having downstream.
Awesome. Thank you. And then last question in the chat at the moment from Abby, knowing what you know now about data collection, gathering from multiple sources, what are some lessons learned you have about the collection and analysis phase?
I guess for me, really try to determine sort of existing data gaps before you get into trying to build the model. That's where this was my first like modeling effort. I had no real experience, so it was definitely a large learning curve. I wish I had done more sort of like QA/QC of the data to really see where I might have been missing data, because I spent like a couple weeks with my model crashing and I didn't know why. And I found out later that it was because I was missing a month of data in one of my input files. So that would have been useful. I've gathered a lot of techniques for combing through my data and making sure that it's clean and useful for the modeling process now.
Awesome. Yeah, super, super important lesson learned. I was going to ask if you had prior modeling experience, because this does seem like a pretty technically involved project. And I saw your background's in environmental engineering. So sounds like you didn't get a lot of modeling experience there. Were there any other skills that you felt like you got as an environmental engineer that you were able to apply to this project?
Yeah, so I was definitely a little concerned coming into this project not having the modeling experience, but I did have some data analysis skills from college, and then also because I was in environmental engineering and understanding of hydrology, and engineering in general is sort of like systems thinking. And so I was pretty good at applying all of that into a new sort of frontier. It was definitely a large effort, like I don't want to discount that, but it helped. It definitely helped to have a technical background.
Absolutely. Well, super, super impressive work.
I just saw Bethany's comment. But yeah, whenever I say I don't have modeling experience, always in the back of my mind, I think that as well. Not a photographer modeling background.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations, Desiree. Massive work. And congratulations to everyone who presented today. Your projects are so stellar. I saw earlier in the chat, we had a shout out that said California is more prepared for their drought directly because of the work that you all have been doing. So I hope you know how impactful your service over the last 11 months has been. So huge, huge shout out to you all. And I hope you get a lot of time, not just now, but in the next few weeks to celebrate and really reflect on everything you've done this year. So we're going to go ahead and start the wrap up for today. Thank you so much to the audience for participating, for asking awesome questions. I want to give a special shout out to all of our project partners who were in the audience today. Thank you for providing a space and mentorship and coaching to all these amazing fellows to help set them up for success in their roles. Really appreciate your continued support of this program. I also want to shout out Atlee Keller too, who also fearlessly led the Water Fellows this year and provided them with a lot of great technical resources and was just there to be a helping hand when they were muddling through the trials and tribulations of their work. And also here today to help celebrate their accomplishments. Thank you so much, Atlee. Let's see. We have a couple of additional ways I want to highlight for you to continue to celebrate this year's cohort of Civic Spark Fellows. We have 3 more days left of our poster symposium. So through Friday this week, we'll be meeting at 1 o'clock every day to highlight the projects of our Civic Spark Fellows. Tomorrow, we'll hear from fellows for the session called Planning in the Age of COVID. So it'll be more built environment and urban management capacity building projects. If you'd like to attend Atlee, please feel free to drop some links in to our website, which has all of the graduation activities, including those poster symposiums, so you can register and attend more. We will also have a graduation ceremony for our fellows on July 29th, also at 1 p.m., so a week from this Thursday. And that's open to the public. Please come and help contribute to uplifting and supporting this amazing cohort. Lastly, you can also go to our website and go to our fellows page, where you'll see all of our fellows and their contact information if you'd like to get in touch with any of them after today. And recordings of these sessions will be available on our website. We'll email them out to all attendees in the last week of July. And with that, thank you so much for attending. I hope everyone stays safe and has a great rest of their week. Thank you all.
Thanks, Kaylee. Thanks, Atlee. Great work, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.